In the 13th century, Snorri Sturluson made a bizarre claim. He wrote that Odin, the all-father of Norse mythology, was originally a human warlord, a chieftain who fled Asia and led his people across the world to Europe. For most historians, the case is closed. The prevailing consensus says this is pure medieval fiction, nothing more than a Christian author trying to make sense of pagan ghosts. But as we examine the historical record, the alibi for this fiction starts to crumble. What if Snorri's myth actually preserves a documented historical truth? We're investigating the evidence to see if the foundations of Norse mythology are built on the bones of a real-world refugee crisis. To understand why Snorri was dismissed, we have to look at his environment. He was writing in 13th century Iceland, a highly isolated Christian society where scholars were trying to reconcile their pagan past with their new faith. Snorri's library was deep. He had access to Icelandic translations of Roman histories and the legendary fall of Troy, all circulating within his small circle of educated elites. He used those classical texts to dress up his narrative, giving Odin a prestigious Trojan pedigree to make the migration story sound acceptable to a medieval Christian audience. But while the library explains how Snorri packaged the myth, it doesn't explain where the core memory of the migration came from in the first place. Snorri writes that Odin ruled the Aesir, or the As, whose homeland sat east of the river Tenaz, the boundary between Europe and Asia. Forced out by empires, these rulers migrated westward, establishing kingdoms in Saxland before pushing north into Scandinavia. When we check the historical record, one suspect fits this profile exactly: an Iranian steppe people known historically as the Alans or the As. Think about the odds. An isolated Icelandic author manages to correctly guess the exact geographic origin, the specific migration route, and the name of a real Eastern warrior tribe. Let's line them up. We're putting Snorri's myth next to the documented history of the Alans. Match 1. Geography. Snorri placed the As near the Tannanese. The historical Alans dominated this exact Don River region for centuries. Their territory stretched across the Pontic, Caspian, and Caucasian worlds, the exact eastern zone Snorri describes. Match 2. The threat. Snorri says Odin fled an empire that was swallowing the world. In the 4th century, the historical Alans were shattered and displaced by the real Hunnic invasions. Match 3. The military. Snorri portrays Odin as a mobile cavalry chief. The historical Alans were notoriously elite professional horsemen, famous across the ancient world for their cavalry. Match 4. The route. Snorri says the Aesir moved into Germanic lands. Historically, Alanic groups migrated west in coalitions with Germanic tribes like the Vandals and the Suebi. Match 5. Political embedding. Snorri claims Odin placed his sons as kings. In reality, Alanic elites literally embedded themselves into the post-Roman Germanic ruling classes. Look at the volume of evidence. The names, the rivers, the enemies, the military tactics, and the destination all align. When every major structural detail perfectly matches a documented historical population shift, calling it coincidence stops being skepticism and becomes a denial of the facts. This doesn't mean Odin was a single, literal person who biologically fathered every king in Scandinavia. This is historical compression. The chaos of multi-generational migrations, different chiefs, and blending cultures collapses into a single icon. Messy dates and battles fade away, leaving a founder memory. The leader becomes the father of the nation. Compression keeps the structure, but alters the details. Snorri blamed Roman expansion for the migration, because Rome was the empire he knew from his books, replacing the historically accurate, but less famous, shock of the Huns. Snorri's text is a poor biography, but it is an astonishingly accurate structural map of a real population shift in late antiquity. When you strip away the Trojan myths and the medieval packaging, you find the bedrock, an Eastern warrior elite migrating into Europe. They merged so completely with the local Germanic tribes that their history didn't vanish, it just transformed. History outlasts the ink on the page. Sometimes it hides inside the gods. Visit wodensman.com to review the case file.